Have you ever sat awake through a silent midnight, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word you said, every pause felt too long, and every smile that wasn't quite a smile? You rewind the day frame by frame. You seek in the tiniest of gestures a cue, editing the past, trying to script tomorrow. And your heartbeat becomes a silent metronome, while your mind is persecuting you under some inner bright lights. You call it overthinking. But what if this is not an innocuous habit? What if it's a device that your psyche built to keep you from touching the hot edge of what you truly feel? Jung saw this mechanism long before we gave it a name. He called it the last bastion of the ego, a glittering palace of reason and intellection, ramparts piled high with explanations, gates guarded by questions. It doesn't keep out the pain, it keeps out the truth. But why would your own mind fight off the truth? What was Jung really saying? And what happens when it finally cracks? Stay with me, because when the first hairline fracture runs through those walls, something stirs in the dark behind your thoughts. And what Jung uncovered there will change how you hear your inner voice forever.
Carl Gustav Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." He noticed the chronic overthinker is not simply a person who likes ideas. The overthinker is someone who has learned to replace feeling with explanation. He builds a smooth, gleaming surface of logic to cover the trembling ground underneath. He can describe the weather of his psyche in perfect detail, yet never steps outside to feel the rain. Again and again, Jung met patients who were brilliantly articulate and strangely numb. They could map their motives, list their complexes, summarize their childhoods with immaculate precision. But when asked, "What does this stir in you right now?" their voices thinned. Their intellect worked like a hall of mirrors, reflecting images into infinity while obscuring the living face that stood before it. He believed the intellect often becomes the last defense of the ego, a refuge where nothing raw or unpredictable can break through. The man recorded every dream he had, cataloged the symbols and cross-referenced meanings, arguing for its interpretations as if it were the defense of a thesis. Yet he never allowed an image to move him. To Jung, that is not curiosity, but fear in drag as thought, a clever anesthesia against pain. Overthinking becomes a doorway to the unconscious that we stand in without crossing. And on the other side of that threshold, where analysis yields to experience, is a place where transformation really does begin.
He came to Jung with notebooks filled edge to edge. Every morning he recorded columns of details, colors, angles, numbers, dates. He called himself a student of the night mind. Jung called him the Philosopher. In session, he spoke with immaculate clarity, drawing bright lines from myth to symbol to childhood memory. His mind was a glittering instrument, precise and tireless, yet his face remained still, almost airless. When asked what the dream made him feel, he answered with another theory, another map, another clean explanation. Week by week, his dreams began to thin. The red of the apple grayed. Voices became captions. Landscapes flattened into diagrams. Finally, there were only scattered fragments, as if the dream world itself had grown tired of being measured. Jung watched a man become possessed by the intellect. He was no longer thinking, he was a thought in the thinking of his thoughts. The body concurred. His shoulders rose like armor. His breath barely reached his belly. He was safe, and he was starving. Jung warned him, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." The man nodded and wrote it down,
as if a sentence could do the feeling for him. Then Jung named the pattern. Overanalysis had become anesthesia. The more he dissected, the less he could live. And when analysis hardens into defense, the unconscious answers with silence. A century after Jung, modern psychology has a name for the mental spiral he warned about. Researchers call it rumination, the repetitive replay of thoughts that feels productive but rarely moves us forward. Brain imaging shows the default mode network glowing when the mind turns inward to review the past and predict the future. That network is useful for reflection, but when it runs hot and unchecked, it traps attention inside a self-referential loop. The mind keeps seeking a perfect conclusion, and the body pays the price. Breath climbs into the chest. Muscles brace for impact that never arrives. Stress chemistry drips into the bloodstream while you sit perfectly still. Cognition tilts with it. Memory becomes selective, echoing the loudest worries. Judgment narrows. We start mistaking analysis for action. Psychologists call this analysis paralysis, but inside it feels like safety, like certainty, like control. Highly sensitive people are often more processing deeply and noticing details around them than others. Without boundaries in recovery, the gift spirals into overprocessing, where depth turns into a tunnel. Interoception grows fainter. You feel less, so you think more to make up for what you cannot feel. The loop tightens. Here's the paradox. The overthinking brain is not lazy. It is overworked and underconnected. The circuits that help us step back and the circuits that help us step in fall out of rhythm. Reflection becomes fixation, curiosity becomes vigilance, and vigilance, wearing the mask of clarity, is a quiet kind of danger. But Jung found something even more disquieting. The feedback loop doesn't merely disguise pain, it preserves the pattern responsible for the pain. If the mind won't be still, maybe it's defending a deeper truth. To uncover it, we must name the shapes this loop assumes, the masks it wears when sitting opposite us, calling itself reason.
Jung taught that overthinking wears disguises, and if we can't see the mask, we mistake the defense for our identity. He described three faces that appear different but serve the same purpose: to keep us from feeling what the mind can't control. The analyst is the first face. The analyst believes safety lives in explanation. Before a single feeling can be let in, everything has to be maimed, framed, mapped, and justified. The analyst collects theories like shields, quotes like armor, and patterns like a private compass that never points to the heart. The conversations become courtrooms where the evidence gets weighed and nothing personal is admitted. Beneath the glassy calm, the body is tense, shallow the breath, and careful the voice. The secret fear is surrender, because surrender might invite surprise, and surprise might open the door to grief or anger or desire. The analyst keeps the door shut and calls it clarity. The second face is that of the perfectionist. The perfectionist re-edits the past and pre-edits the future, rehearsing every line for fear of the sting of shame. Control becomes a kind of religion. The calendar is crowded with contingency plans. The mind leans in to whisper that certainty assures safety, and the perfectionist polishes every choice until the life goes out of it. Risk becomes the enemy. Joy feels dangerous too, because one cannot guarantee its arrival. Beneath the polish, a quiet terror hides, the terror of being seen as flawed, ordinary, needy. The perfectionist would rather freeze than fail, and in that freeze, time stops moving. The third face is the philosopher of pain. This one makes meaning out of suffering so poetically that healing begins to appear almost crass. Sorrow becomes a way of seeing, a statement, even a brand. The philosopher speaks in profound speech and keeps the wound open because the wound proves depth. If I heal, who am I now? Is the silent question. Meaning replaces movement. Insight replaces change. The story gets fuller and fuller, while the life gets thinner and thinner. These three faces look different, but bow to the same master, fear of feeling. And yet, there is a way they can be unmasked without destroying the gifts behind them. Jung mapped that path, not by silencing thought, but by giving it a new place in a larger rhythm. What he asked his patients to do next will feel strange to the mind and strangely right to the soul.
Jung's way out begins with the simple act of reversal. Instead of explaining your feelings, you let your feelings speak. He called it active imagination, a disciplined daydream where you meet the images of your inner world as if they were real visitors. You do not stand outside them with a clipboard. You step inside. You re-enter a dream, return to a hallway, a river, a locked door, and you ask the figure waiting there what it wants from you. You follow what unfolds without trimming it into theory. Something loosens. The voice that lectures grows quiet. The body begins to answer, with warmth in the chest, with a weight in the belly, a sudden wish to breathe deeper. Jung constructed rituals to make this safe and steady. Set a small window of time and a clear boundary. Sit with a page. Sketch the most charged image from a dream. Then write a dialogue between you and that image. Let the flame, the wolf, the child, the old woman speak in their own words. If emotion rises, slow down. Feel your feet. Name the texture of the sensation and return when ready. This is not indulgence. It is integration through contact, a process of titration that teaches the nervous system to hold what it once avoided. He called the intellect back only after the meeting. You can then magnify the image with myth, symbol, and history, not to flatten it, but to extend it. The thought is a lantern, not a searchlight. The analyst learns to ask, who inside me is speaking, not only why. The perfectionist practices good enough ritual instead of perfect control. The philosopher of pain risks an act, small, honoring meaning with movement. Jung lived this road in his Red Book years. He drew, he wrote, he spoke with the depths until the images no longer ruled him from the dark. In that rhythm, the mind takes its rightful seat, serving the soul, not serving as jailer, guide. And once you taste that balance, even your most relentless thoughts start to march to the beat of your life.
Failed integration begins with a glimpse. You meet a powerful image, feel a surge of truth, and then rush back into the safety of thought. Insight replaces contact. The mind starts curating a museum of meanings while the heart waits outside in the cold. You can speak about archetypes and shadow work with flawless elegance, yet you cannot let a single raw feeling pass through your chest without turning it into a lesson. The psyche notices. The dreams grow thin. Symbols become labels. Movement stalls. Jung warned that the ego will borrow the language of depth to avoid the demands of depth. That borrowing produces inflation. You begin to feel subtly superior, strangely untouchable, certain that understanding is the same as change. Relationships become lecture halls. You analyze instead of apologizing, interpret instead of repairing. The more you talk about light, the larger the shadow at your back. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. When integration fails, the unconscious stops negotiating. It speaks in other ways. Mood swings sharpen. Somatic signals escalate. Old compulsions return dressed in new philosophy. You cling to rituals, but feel hollow inside them. The fortress of intellect hardens into a cage, and what once felt like clarity becomes isolation. You do not lose your intelligence. You lose your warmth. But Jung discovered something even more disturbing. When the mind refuses to feel, the shadow learns to wear the mask of virtue. It will use your discipline to hide, your spirituality to avoid, your kindness to control, and it will keep doing so until a different rhythm begins, one that asks for contact over certainty and feeling over performance.
Transformation begins the moment thinking stops trying to win and starts trying to listen. The question shifts from, "Why do I think this?" to, "Which part of me is afraid to stop thinking?" In that pivot, the mind is no longer a courtroom demanding proof. It becomes a porch light, guiding you toward the feeling you avoided. You notice the tight jaw, the shallow breath, the lifted shoulders. You breathe lower. You name the sensation instead of narrating it. The body answers, and the story changes. Thought becomes wisdom when it takes its proper place in a wider rhythm. Reflection leads to a small act, a phone call, an apology, a boundary kept, a night of real rest. You still think, but the thought points to movement rather than circling the same conclusion. Curiosity replaces vigilance. Options appear where before there were only arguments. The nervous system feels a little more room, and in that room, a new voice speaks with calm clarity. The signs are subtle and unmistakable. Dreams regain color. Timing improves. You can pause without falling into a hole. You can choose without rehearsing 10 futures. Relationships soften because you bring presence instead of explanations. The intellect does not dim, it warms. It becomes a servant of meaning instead of a guard against it. This is Jung's quiet revolution, the union of what knows and what feels. Not the end of thought, but the beginning of a mind aligned with the soul's direction. A mind finally trusted because it knows when to lead and when to bow.
If you recognize yourself in these patterns, if your nights stretch long and your thoughts circle like searchlights, you are not broken. You are in conversation with a part of you that has been waiting to be heard. Overthinking is not proof that you are weak. It is proof that you care, that you notice, that your system is trying to keep you safe the only way it knows how. The fortress of thought was built for a reason. Now it is time to open a gate. Begin small. When the loop starts, pause and listen beneath the words for the feeling that does not speak in sentences. Name the texture of it. Heavy, hot, tight. Let your breath sift through the center of that sensation until something in you unclenches. Ask the simplest question you can. What am I protecting right now? Then wait. The answer will not arrive as a thesis. It will arrive as a tug toward one honest action. Choose one thing today that moves you from explanation to contact. Send the message you keep drafting. Keep the boundary you keep promising. Sit with a single image from a dream and let it answer you. Do it imperfectly and let that be your practice. You will not lose your intelligence by doing this. You will recover your warmth. Thought will become a lantern instead of a guard, and in that light, the part of you that has been alone for years will finally feel you standing beside it. If this spoke to you, pause right here and let the quiet land. You are not late. You are not behind. You are arriving. The fortress you built did its job. Now it is time to step through the gate you just unlocked. Thought can still walk with you, but it does not have to walk in front. Tell me in the comments what your thoughts have been protecting. Name the feeling that hides beneath your neatest explanation. Name one small act you will take in the next hour that moves you from analysis to contact. A call, a boundary, a breath you finish. Let this be where understanding becomes movement. If this helped you find language for what you live, subscribe and turn on notifications. Share this with someone who lies awake the way you do. Join a community that values clarity and warmth in the same breath. We will keep walking this path together, step by honest step. Next, we will uncover the secret reason some people fear their own dreams, why the night pulls certain truths to the surface, how dream figures test our boundaries, and a gentle method for meeting a dream at the door without losing your ground. I will see you there. Until then, breathe lower, feel what is true, and let your mind bow to the wisdom that has been waiting for you all along.